I turned 60 today. When I was a child and going through something that I talk a great deal about, I didn't think I'd make it to see 40, turn of the century. So I'm in old age now, and I'm high risk for the condition that's going around. Um, School had a program today about mental health, but they didn't have interpreters or closed captions, so I couldn't go. They're going to record it for me. But it occurred to me that it might be a good idea to address this issue. After all, I've been in recovery programs for years before I went to school. I've received a number of different diagnoses, and I've been resilient and sometimes controversial about what has been said about me and what the purpose was. And so I think it might be a good idea, seeing as I'm in isolation. I'm not going to recovery communities where people can see me all the time. My doctor, who's known me a really, really long time, is far away. Happily, she managed to secure the cooperation of my best friend in sending me a card. It was good to hear from them both. To begin, I want to point out that the issue that I have raised, one that might disarmingly be considered a Central Intelligence Agency issue, which itself puts you in harm's way when it comes to police psychiatrists. They don't want to hear somebody who has been diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic say the CIA about anything. But on a birthday many years ago in 1987, when I was 27 years old, a CIA agent of high ranking followed me to Allentown and gave a talk, signed his name, wrote the date, and underlined it. So the issue that I have raised about now COVID-19, the AIDS attack and so forth, play into the diagnosis. And my statements that I saw a key snap out of my hand and heard voices after the Midori show at Heinz Hall many years ago, when the script showed up, advertises a sort of parochial glee club, ha ha ha, see, those are traditional symptoms. And it functions as a squelch. But what I wanted to mention was the issue of the police community. If you look at Seattle recently, somebody threw a torch with a cop inside. Police car. There's a video on Yahoo.com of people cheering while a cop gets beaten up. And we've seen these terrible films of police beating people. So, I was sort of accosted, not treated very honorably by the Real Change newspaper in Seattle, but they printed some of my poems. And they, in a roundabout way, were, affirmative of me. They got one of my poems printed in this. But they are bullies about don't ever talk to the police. Don't ever, if you ever so much as approach the FBI. Well, the thing is, with all due respect, you know, right here, because what we're talking about is apprehending the people who were behind the AIDS attack. And so what happens is that you think, well, the police aren't going to do anything about it, and they generally don't, any more than they did anything about what happened to JFK. I mean, the sort of CIA, you know, they don't want to be diagnosed. You know, so they're on, you know, alternate reality when it comes to intelligence community stuff. And then you have the UW dialecticalists who play act being Marxists while working with the military and getting all of these zombies under their guru status for good grades. Now, I hate to call my peers zombies, but when they play into a situation like that, even when it's brought to their attention that deception is going on, it's hard not to say something a little bit, you know, sort of part of rigor in political circles. Use a put down of some kind. You know, because it's built into your reflexes. And in fact, when I was suffering from what I really was suffering from, which was an impacted neuroplasia, it was a bomb in the psyche that went off, and it was like demonic possession. I mean, if we didn't have free speech, I could have been killed for the sort of things I was saying, but I had the sense to go to the Des Moines River, get on a bus 1,000 miles from Pittsburgh, which is how I ended up in Seattle, because the bus was late going back to Pittsburgh. And I was too shaken up to continue back to Pittsburgh, and the driver saw me crying and offered to change my ticket for a 15% fee. Usually you have to wait 2 weeks, but he could see how shaken up I was. Anyway, I went down to the Des Moines River to scream. And they, of course, had used that as a psychological mechanism in what they were calling Operation Medicine Man, you know, when they boiled everybody with AIDS alive who was going to go, and then set off little, you know, guru bombs. And Tony Levin was saying, maybe we'll inject you. Maybe it's just a joke, Jimmy. It's just a joke, Jimmy. The point is, it was impacted, premeditated vituperative syndrome. And you can get dragged, even if you're a gentleman. And we saw very almost picture-perfect gentleman, Joe Biden, get dragged, kicking and screaming into the brawl that Donald Trump put him out for him as bait. It's hard not to, so I take back calling these kids zombies. But it's a mistake to think that there is going to be some kind of extra legal rock and roll solution. What there's going to be is an evaluation of evidence and a criminal prosecution after arrests. And I proposed to Congress in AIDS Nuremberg years ago with a tribunal that could even call the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court as a defendant if necessary. Because we can't have Congress and Supreme Court and the executive putting on an act and releasing plagues. We can't stand for that. What we have to do instead is to look at the evidence and find out who did that. Put it into our history books and our newspapers and request politely that the proper processes and subpoenas and warrants be served. So, with all due respect, I mean, I don't like giving real change the finger, but they're full of it. And then they use these concepts of poisoning somebody like me as though that's an answer, and expect them to be trusted as not using poison. Why did you use poison? To prove I would never use poison. And that's a refrain with these people. If you go to my blog, Story Checks Out, or you'll see they raped somebody to prove they would never rape somebody. They blew us up on 911 to proved they would never blow us up on 911. They you created an AIDS war game on Mount Desert Island to prove they would never create a war game on Mount Desert Island. What gives? Anybody would buy that. So real change seems to be in the pocket of the people who did it, and they don't want anybody talking to the police. And the police are in the pocket of those who did it, and they don't want anybody talking to them either. I tried to go with evidence to the police, and they just arrested me. So, I mean, we're living in a sicko society. Everybody knows that. But we have to do our level best to be democratic and show that this is the United States and we have a government here. We can't just let these things happen. Whether they were Israeli scientists at the University of Pittsburgh or, Catholic scientists at Mellon Institute or Salk labor people, it's not an acceptable way to proceed. So we have to get together to look at these things as crimes and talk about it as crimes. And I realize that the honchos are out there spitting nails, killing bystanders, and doing. But then they get people who are just ordinary people cover up for them. And you say that there's something wrong with me, that I'm mentally ill because I won't stand for my name being used for something like that. Please tell me you're kidding. Okay? And take my name off that fucking scroll. And put on the name that belongs there, Tony Levin.